Hello all, James here. Now, Andrade. Now, back on October 1st, AEW Dynamite hosted the thrilling return of Andrade El Idolo. And by thrilling, I mean the exact reaction when seeing his return after being fired less than 3 weeks later by WWE was the following. Not even there's that guy. I'm sorry, I've never really been what you would call an Andrade fan during any of his runs, because WWE, AEW, beyond, it doesn't matter. It's not that he's a bad wrestler or anything. He's just more, he's more than competent in the ring, but he's not my guy. He doesn't draw me in. He hasn't got the charisma. He hasn't. Do you know what's funny about that, actually, is that one of the knocks against Andrade, apparently, in WWE in his latest run, was that his English isn't that good. But then on Raw this past Monday, they had like a backstage segment with Asuka and Kairi Sane, I think, where they taught Japanese the entire way through. So I don't know why that was a knock on him, but not on those two, or unless it's one, I don't know, or Shinsuke Nakamura or whoever else. But anyway, that's not the point. He doesn't draw me in, does Andrade. He doesn't have that intangible that makes me sit up and take notice. He's basically another body on the roster, and evidently WWE in 2024 and 2025 agreed with me, considering the way he was booked. Not as a glorified jobber, but as somebody who you could basically take or leave. Somebody who you could get a decent opening match out of and then warm up the crowd before the people you actually paid your exorbitant ticket prices to go see turn up later in the show. He was basically a Speed title guy, as evidenced by the fact he's actually a former Speed champion, if you didn't know, which he may well not have done, and it's a title nobody cares about, even internally in WWE. So, imagine my indifference turning into befuddlement as Andre El Idolo, who was treated as pretty much an opening guy in WWE, returned to AEW on their 6th anniversary episode of AEW Dynamite on October 1st and attacked, of all people, Kenny Omega. One of AEW's top stars, especially now considering that so many of AEW's top stars are out with serious injuries. Now, the booking of that pairing made no sense to me. A company might want to rehab a wrestler's image, but I mean, with a 3-week sort of spell in between, I mean, it's very difficult. But this reminded me, and I always think this is a really good example, of when Raven went to TNA in the early 2000s, from a sizzling year competing on WWE B show Heat to becoming a top contender to perennial NWA world champion at the time, Jeff Jarrett. And it's like in a matter of weeks, basically, this happened. It doesn't tell me that Raven, who was bottom of the rung in WWE just weeks earlier and had been misused by WWE, that is true, but as a television product, what it tells me is that the level of competition in TNA was so much lower than WWE that an opening match guy in WWE was considered a world championship contender in TNA. And it's a similar thing here. Andrade was a second match on the card guy 1 week in WWE, and now he's challenging a top star in AEW, the perceived lesser company, in 3 weeks' time. This is against Booking 101, but it doesn't surprise me that this has sort of gone over Tony Khan's head. AEW booking, which seemed to be turning around slightly at the beginning of the year, is now right back to where it was in 2023 and 2024. And that's not saying that WWE's booking is that much better. It's just that WWE is just so stale at the moment, but then with the Seth Rollins turn sort of necessitated by injury, that's at least put a spanner in the works and is something memorable to go forth and build upon from that. But anyway, Andrade not only attacks Kenny Omega, he then joins the Don Callis World Order, a faction that is so bloated and filled with mostly lower and mid-card acts, several of which are injured, by the way, currently, that it doesn't just resemble the New World Order, it resembles one giant NWO B team. Aside from Kyle Fletcher, Okada, Takeshita, maybe one other person, maybe, it's just a bunch of Virgils and Horace Hogans running around, running amok in AEW, supposedly, and that's when they all turn up at the same time, which they don't. There always seems to be somebody missing. I don't know if I'm right in saying this. Tell me, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I don't think the entire Don Callis family, as it has existed in the past few months, have all been on screen at the same time. In fact, when most of the Don Callis family turned up on Dynamite last night, they were specifically missing Andrade yet again, which is the entire point of this video. Now, Andrade, since appearing on October the 1st, AEW Dynamite, has not been seen in AEW since. After attacking Kenny Omega, it was presumed by all that they would be facing each other at AEW's next pay-per-view, WrestleDream, which is this weekend. Now, not only is Andrade missing in action like Chuck Norris was, Kenny Omega is now also not on the WrestleDream pay-per-view. Instead, Omega teamed up with the Jurassic Express, which I could do an entire video on those two getting back together, versus Hechicero, Josh Alexander, and Mark Davis. Now, that was on Dynamite last night. And I sort of thought right there and then, well, this is hardly the greatest use of Omega's time, considering it takes days upon days for him to recover from a wrestling bout due to the near-fatal diverticulitis issue that he's still dealing with the fallout from. Now, that being said, what happened to Andrade? Well, a new theory has been put out there this morning, at least morning my time. But before we get into that, let's talk about how Andrade got to where he is. Now, Andrade's return prompted an impassioned reaction, almost bizarrely so, from Dave Meltzer. Now, in a nutshell, Meltzer commented his thoughts, I'm going to be reading some of his quotes here, that AEW shouldn't have brought back Andrade at all. He said, quote, AEW has enough talent. They don't need, I've seen everyone celebrating, oh my god, this is so great and all this. Andrade's a very good wrestler. He's coming off of a run that wasn't good in WWE. He was fired over disciplinary reasons. He had lots of problems in AEW over disciplinary reasons. Guys who get fired by WWE and go to AEW, is there a case of a success of a guy who was actually fired by WWE and went to AEW? And then Meltzer pointed out wrestlers such as Tony Storm and Bryan Danielson and Ricochet that were not fired after leaving WWE. They left of their own volition, or I don't even know if it could be said that they didn't renew, whatever the difference is. And then he named William Regal, Aleister Black, aka Malachi Black, and Rusev, aka Miro, who were fired by WWE, and they were not success stories in AEW, which, especially in... I'd kind of argue against William Regal because he was a really good presence, but he didn't want to be there. Malachi Black, he never lost. He's one of the, I guess he's one of the WWE guys who just never seemed to lose at the time. He lost less than a handful of times over 3 years. And Rusev apparently was the most difficult of them all. But once again, here's the quote. That was the most ill-spent money, he's referring to Rusev, Tony Khan probably ever did, or among them. I shouldn't say the most, but among them was that one, because the guy, it's like this guy, Rusev once again, wouldn't do anything in AEW, and then he goes to WWE and he's putting over Dominic Mysterio, you know? I mean, he wouldn't put over guys twice as good as Dominic in AEW. And right there, that shows the sort of, why don't we steal a term here, basic thinking here, saying that Dominic Mysterio is not as good as, Rusev is putting over Dominic Mysterio, but not people who are twice as good. Who's twice as good as Dominic Mysterio in AEW, really, if you're honest with yourself? Because the whole point of wrestling is to draw fans, sell tickets, and get reactions from the audience. There are very few people out there, even on WWE's roster, who is as good as that as Dominic Mysterio. And a lot of AEW fans specifically, I bet, cannot bear to admit that to themselves, that Dominic Mysterio is a massive success story in wrestling. He's exceeded expectations, wildly so, since he debuted with Ray a few years earlier. But that being said, Rusev was, by all reports, a huge nightmare to deal with. But Meltzer continued on Andrade. As people, once again, this is the quote, who know Andrade have told me, he'll always think of Tony Khan as secondary to WWE no matter what, and we're asking for trouble. Meltzer also stated one of AEW's biggest problems is utilising former WWE talents who weren't sufficiently pushed in WWE. Quotes once again, AEW is secondary to WWE. I'm sorry, that was where the quote ended. So yeah, he's talking about, Andrade shouldn't be there because he thinks less of AEW than he does WWE. Here's the thing. Pretty much everybody does. If you use basically any metric to compare the two companies, WWE comes out ahead. And I'll guarantee that anyone with any kind of tenure in pro wrestling in AEW currently also knows for a fact that WWE is the show and AEW is inferior to them. Now, we're not talking about what kind of pro wrestling on screen you prefer. We're talking about basically any metric you care to use, that WWE comes out on top. That is just a fact. And I think if anybody thinks any differently, and I'm not a massive WWE booster, if you're an AEW fan, you don't follow my content, but you've clicked on this video, why don't you go through the history of all of the videos I've done knocking WWE as well? So I'm just calling it as I see it here. But once again, Dave Meltzer takes any criticism against AEW like a personal attack, like you're insulting one of his children. But anyway, this rambling monologue he did like a few days ago was really bizarre, and he seemed to be taking it personally. But I'm also going to stick up for him because he does bring up a couple of good points here. A rarity for me to say. Andrade in WWE was coming off of what PW Insider termed as, quote, multiple wellness policy violations over the last year. Since weed is no longer a policy violation, that means he was either doing some of the stronger stuff and either couldn't or wouldn't stop, or he was refusing to take tests, which engenders basically the same punishments and penalties. So it's not my place to speculate what it might be that he will have failed for, or any personal issues that he was dealing with WWE at the time, but I'm sure you can guess some of them, or how they would have affected him or his decision making in WWE over the last year or so. But what's really shocking is there are so few publicised WWE wellness policy violations that it's actually really big news when it does happen. The last one I remember before Andrade, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it was Matt Riddle, and that was shortly before WWE chucked him as well. Now, this already makes AEW look bad. You're hiring somebody with multiple drug violations, or wellness policy violations, let's be specific, and also somebody with a history, not only in AEW but WWE, of maybe being problematic in one way or another in the locker room, and we'll get to that in a minute. But once again, I'm going to bring up TNA. Do you remember when Kurt Angle was having serious addiction issues in WWE to the point that Vince McMahon thought he was going to die on his watch, and he outright fired him, released him, no caveats, in 2006, only for Dixie Carter and TNA to snap him right up? I'm not saying that Andrade's issues, whatever they may be, are anywhere near as serious as Kurt Angle's, but Andrade is also not 1,000th of the star or draw that Kurt Angle is, at least in the United States. In Mexico, it might be a little different, but the world over, Kurt Angle is by far the biggest star. So I can sort of see Dixie Carter and TNA's rationale for hiring Kurt Angle and hoping he lives, because he's going to be, the new face of the company, I suppose. But then, why would Tony Khan take the risk on hiring Andrade? And one, because of all these issues that are now well publicised, but two, elevating above where I guess the majority of fans believe he should realistically be booked. There was also the erratic behaviour. This is what I was alluding to a minute ago. Andrade's last match was at WWE SummerSlam 2025. That's August 3rd. He was fired September 13th. In between those 2 days, it was said that WWE plans featured Andrade and Rey Fenix becoming WWE Tag Team Champions on SmackDown. That would have been the biggest deal probably of Andrade's second WWE tenure to date. Only he became impossible to contact. As in, he wasn't picking up his phone to anybody in the WWE office. He basically just disappeared. In fact, the mystery of his absence started when he was forcibly escorted from a WWE SmackDown show several weeks before WWE fired him in relation to another WWE wellness policy violation. Another rumour that made the rounds but was dismissed by PW Insider and Mike Johnson claimed that he didn't want to work in the Mexican promotion AAA, which WWE now owns a controlling stake in. PW Insider said there are no plans for Andrade in AAA because, to be honest, there were no plans for Andrade anywhere. But now whether Andrade was purposely not answering the phone to get himself fired or not is open to debate. But if so, it worked. But then, how can Andrade then appear on AEW television so soon after getting fired by WWE? Well, doesn't he have a 90-day no-compete clause standard in all WWE contracts? And also, he had 18 months left on his contract with WWE. Well, once again, it was reported by numerous outlets that because Andrade was fired, that the 90-day no-compete clause would not come into effect. And that's kind of strange because you look at Jeff Hardy in late 2021, where he walked out on that match, and then he did sign with AEW afterwards. He, I think, did have to wait 90 days. I checked his match listings. There was at least 90 days between his final match with WWE and first match with AEW. Now, you might be asking to yourself, weren't no-compete clauses banned by the FTC in the United States? Yes, they were. Most of them were, at least, in April 2024. But the state of Texas launched an appeal, and litigation is still ongoing. So the injunction remains in place, and the law has yet to change until that legal matter is resolved. So all these no-compete clauses are still in effect like they were prior to April 2024. But it's possible that an existing no-compete clause that AEW and Andrade especially thought was resolved is in fact the key reason why Andrade appeared and then disappeared just as quickly. Brian Alvarez reported the following. Regarding Andrade, all I know is that he's not injured and something is holding him up regarding his non-compete with WWE. Here's where it gets even weirder. Andrade did also wrestle for the Mexican Crash promotion in October 3rd. That's 2 days after his AEW Dynamite appearance. And then nothing. Well, not actually nothing. He was due to wrestle LA Park in Norcross, Georgia on October 26th, but he's been pulled from that gig. But what he is scheduled to do is wrestle for Carlos Colon's World Wrestling Council in Puerto Rico this weekend. And as far as we know at the moment, he's not been pulled from that show. So now we have Andrade getting pulled from one gig, but possibly still wrestling another indie event on the same day as AEW WrestleDream, where he and Kenny Omega were originally penciled in to wrestle each other, which is, it's all getting really, really crazy at this point. So if he does go through with that match against, in Puerto Rico, then is the 90-day no-compete clause only in the continental United States? Or is Tony Khan angry with Andrade and pulling him from AEW shows because he decided he made a mistake? Or did Tony Khan not clear Andrade's hiring with Dave Meltzer, and now Tony has to be punished? I'm joking, kind of, with that one, I guess. But either way, the mystery deepens. Andrade also faced disciplinary action, easy for me to say, following a backstage incident with Sammy Guevara during his first AEW run, which was well publicised at the time. Essentially, hiring Andrade for WWE and AEW now comes with a lot of baggage. But the one statement that's really germane, I guess, to this video, Andrade took to Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, where he criticised Dave Meltzer's statements and also claimed that the journalist didn't have any proof of what he said. They didn't even put journalist in quotation marks there. Dave Meltzer, WON, you talk too much shit without proof. And sir, I'll only tell you one thing. When my contract with AEW ended, I personally went man-to-man to thank Mr. Tony Khan for the opportunity to be in AEW, and that's all I'll tell you. If I wanted to talk more, I would show you that you're wrong about many things, but you keep killing the business, and then some other stuff. So there you go. Once again, the Andrade mystery deepens. The latest claim is that they thought there was a 90-day no-compete. They thought there wasn't a 90-day no-compete, and now the theory is that there is a 90-day no-compete, and WWE either didn't enforce it, immediately, or they were mistaken, or whatever it is, but now that there is a 90-day no-compete, and basically Andrade won't be seen in AEW until 2026 at this rate. So, please tell me what you think. You think of him off base? Do you think Brian Alvarez is truthful? Do you think it makes sense that Andrade's been pulled from one independent gig but not another one, but one's in the States and one isn't? I don't know. Because the Mexican promotion Crash is in Mexico. So you tell me what you think in the comments. This is a real mystery to all involved pretty much. Like, comment, subscribe, go for the algorithm, all that kind of nonsense. And I'll see you again soon for the next video.